Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to look at some kind of interesting information that's come out about the Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie that was in development. It has since been dropped. However, the script itself is still floating around, and I believe they're trying to rework it right now with a second writer. So I'm curious if that'll ever see the light of day. But we did get confirmation that Tarantino's original script, again, before changes are probably going to be made to it, was based on the original series episode A Piece of the Action. Now, this is leading into kind of a bigger subject of kind of what makes a really good Star Trek movie, but I want to examine the choice and the idea of basing an episode around that, because that's the thing is, back when the original television show was coming out, they had episodes like that where they would go down to these planets and it would seem like it was, something out of American history. Sometimes it was, sometimes it was time travel. Every once in a while they did something like that. Sometimes they would find a planet that would mimic a human society. Again, A Piece of the Action is like that. They also did one where they went to a Nazi planet, which, again, that's just a whole weird plot line in and of itself. But the season 2 episode, A Piece of the Action, was basically about the Enterprise going to this planet where a Federation ship had crashed nearly 100 years before. And the planet was somehow able to reach out to them and tell them that they have pieces of this ship that they can come pick up and take away from them, because they don't, for whatever reason. But it's something that they can recover from it. Some kind of, I forget exactly what the wording is that they use, but basically that lures the Enterprise in, and then they take Kirk and Spock and McCoy hostage, and they basically try to get them to send down better weapons and phasers, and through some trickery and stuff like that, they managed to basically make the leaders work together and kind of subjugate the planet, I guess you can say at the end, even though it's not really subjugation. But the episode itself, I don't think you can take that concept necessarily and put it into a Star Trek movie, because if you look at the really good Star Trek films, most of them do not have to do with time travel or going back in time to see things that we've kind of already seen. The idea of a Star Trek movie should be to show people something new and science fiction-y, and kind of, have that kind of space opera type of feel to it with the drama. It's a bit more serious than Star Wars. It's not as fantasy related. That hardcore science fiction crowd that you're really catering to. And like I said, if you look at the best Star Trek films, they're all kind of based around that, that sci-fi type of episode from the show, where a lot of it takes place on the ship, or sometimes it's an alien planet that's not really familiar. Again, it's a bit, not to say alien again, but it's an alien type of atmosphere, a Mars-ish type of atmosphere or something like that, or something like a planet like in Search for Spock, where they go to the Genesis planet where it's like a jungle and stuff. Something that seems alien in some way. And really, you shouldn't do that with an episode like, you shouldn't try to transfer an episode like A Piece of the Action into a film. I think it works very well in an episodic format. You can make an hour-long episode out of that. They made it an actually fairly interesting episode. I do enjoy that one particularly. The Nazi Planet one actually isn't too bad either. It's kind of funny and stupid, but it's fun. But it's interesting. But those are good for television. Those are good things to adapt for television. There's a reason why Nicholas Meyer watched all the original series episodes and said, I want to do a sequel to this, to Space Seed, where you have Khan coming back. Because it was an interesting concept of this genetically altered superhuman that, is an egotistical, murdering psychopath, and you just bring him back into the fold like that, 15 years later in the Trek timeline. So it really did work. And if you look at some of the other episodes that they did a time travel episode where they went back to the 60s. They basically copied the same thing for Star Trek 4, which I think is really the only really good Star Trek movie that deals with time travel. I know the Next Generation crew did Star Trek First Contact, but I'm kind of lukewarm on most of those films. I'm lukewarm. I recognize the TNG is a very good Star Trek series, and it's the best series we've had since the original. But at the same time, it's not 100% my thing. I'm more an original series person, so I'm kind of lukewarm on those films. Even though First Contact, I don't think is a bad Star Trek film. I think it is a rather good one. But then you also have the whole time travel elements with the Calvin timeline, with the newer films and stuff like that. That half of it doesn't make any fucking sense. But you know, time travel can work in a Star Trek plot. Like I said, Star Trek 4 was able to do it successfully, and Star Trek First Contact were able to do it successfully. But um, I think that the reason why those two particular films work is because, number one, even though First Contact does go back in time, it is still technically in our future. Uh, so it's not as much of a shell shock. We're still seeing stuff that might be semi-familiar, but it's still alien in some nature because it's technology that we don't have. And then if you go to the not Voyager, Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, um, when they go back to the past, at the time when that film came out, that was present day 1986. So they weren't showing you necessarily something that was alien. They were showing something that was common, but they were also kind of adding in that really interesting dry humor that Leonard Nimoy incorporated into that film. Because you have the great moment where Spock's on the bus and he gives the guy the neck pinch who has like the really loud boom box that will shut up. You have the scenes where they park the Klingon bird of prey on the top of the trash can, and it's invisible, so it just like crushes part of the grass down and stuff. You have fun little moments like that that really do work, and it doesn't get too corny. It doesn't go into Star Trek V levels of corny. But God, that one is awful. But like I said, this is kind of leading into what makes a really good Trek film. And like I said, I think you gotta go away from those gimmicky TV episodes, and you gotta go to things that you can expand into that grandiose sci-fi opera. Even the Star Trek One, that was really just a rehash of an original series episode where it was the same idea, but instead the probe was very small, but it had an extreme amount of power. It could like destroy the Enterprise. So that was the idea of it. Instead of having this huge thing called V'ger, which is a version of Voyager 6, I believe, and it just comes back to Earth as like this giant probe that's so like the size of a galaxy, and it's going to destroy everything. They just kind of took that idea and maximized it to about 10. Apparently, that script for Star Trek 1 was actually a scrapped TV pilot for Star Trek Phase 2, which was going to be a sequel series that was going to come out in the 70s for Star Trek, the original series, which ended in 1969. So they did recycle a television script for that very literally. But you go to Star Trek 2, and again, it's an interesting story. It really doesn't have a whole lot to do with modern day. Even the stuff involving Khan was supposed to take place well after us, because it was supposed to take place after World War III, which again hasn't happened, at least in the Star Trek timeline. So I mean, it's still technically in the future. So we're not dealing with anything currently present. And the other thing is, a lot of the themes in the movie are very kind of universal. The idea of growing old and rebirth and revenge and stuff like that. Again, those are very kind of universal motivations. So we're able to get behind who we need to get behind in that film in order to kind of keep the thing going. Khan is obviously the antagonist. Kirk is obviously the hero. But Kirk is also unsure of himself at this point in his life, unlike when he was younger. And Khan is just driven specifically by revenge, and his ego has never been larger. So you understand the threat there. But moving into stuff, like Star Trek 3, which again, even though people don't like 1 and some people don't like 3, I actually like both of those movies. Mainly 1 for the soundtrack, but when you go into 3, I mean, it's a direct continuation of 2 as well as 4. 4 is kind of the third one in that whole block of the trilogy. But the third one is literally just dedicated to bringing Spock back. I mean, it doesn't do anything, I would say, outrageously good. You have Christopher Lloyd as a Klingon, which is amazing. And that's the other thing, too, is that they brought in the Klingons in the third film as a main antagonist. They didn't just keep reusing the same antagonist over and over again in the movies for the most part, other than the Klingons are still kind of the antagonists in 6, even though it's a frame job. And then in the Next Generation films, then you start getting into the Borg and stuff. But in the original Star Trek movies, really, the Klingons take up, I think, part 4 and part 6. And then 5 is like just a random group of terrorists and Spock's brother. 4 is a probe, an alien probe. So I guess there's 2 alien probes actually too, because 4 and 1 both have that. 2 is Khan, and then 3 is, Christopher Lloyd. Like I said, Christopher Lloyd is the Klingon. But again, Christopher Lloyd does a very good job. The effects for the movie are really good. It still has a little bit of that humor. Again, this one was also directed by Leonard Nimoy. It does something we hadn't seen in the films before, which was it blew up the Enterprise, which was actually one of the big shock scenes in that film, because it's hard to understand for people that aren't Trek fans, but when you blow up the Enterprise, especially the old Enterprise, for the very first time, it's kind of like, oh, shit just hit the fan, didn't it? Even though, like I said, I don't necessarily think 3 is as good as 2 or even 4. I think it's better than 1, but it's kind of the middle child in that series. No pun intended, because it is the middle film. But then you go on to 4, and you have a little bit more of the humor. It's a bit more balanced. The acting is a bit better. The story is a bit more relatable, and it works a bit better. But of course, then you move into 5. Now, here's where you fall into the follies with Star Trek films in general. Like I was mentioning, stay away from the hokey television episodes. Also, stay away from horrible, horrible, horrible dialogue. You need to have somebody who can write good dialogue when you have a Trek film, which is why I was kind of excited about Tarantino, because he's very unique with his dialogue. I don't necessarily know if you want to call it smart dialogue, but it's dialogue that feels natural to what you're watching for whatever reason. He's able to film a movie in such a way that the dialogue fits so well that it feels natural with the film, even though half the people in the world would never talk like the way Tarantino writes his characters. So, it's, although you could say that about any writer pretty much for film, because nobody ever talks like they do with the movies. But, if you don't have that type of good writing for a Star Trek film, it's not going to translate well to fans, because even in the old Star Trek, I'm not saying go overboard on the techno babble or anything like that, but you got to have a good balance in the dialogue. You got to have a good back and forth between various characters. The back and forth between Kirk and Bones were always great in the show, as well as Kirk and Spock, and just all three of them together as well. And even them and Scotty and stuff like that, and Sulu and all the supporting characters. Usually the back and forth between them were fairly good when they were on screen together for extended periods of time. Again, especially Kirk and Spock. So it really, you need to be able to capture that again. And I think Tarantino probably could have to an extent. But again, it's something that I think that the story that it was going to be based around was probably going to fail anyway, because it was a gimmicky television episode. But I want to know what you think. Is there an episode of the original series, or actually any of the Star Trek series, that you would like to see expanded and adapted into a full movie, or maybe something that an original series episode? Well, not an original series, but a Star Trek, any Star Trek series episode you would like to see that would have a sequel to it, or something down the road, or maybe something that they could build on in the future. Like I said, put your thoughts in the comments below. I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?